You are in for an interesting ride. So we're here on the 17th of December 2024 with Peter and his absolutely wonderful other half, Elizabeth, and we're having a little Christmas get-together. And then Peter reminded me of a colleague of his whom I actually met once at their golden wedding anniversary celebrations and who since left us. But Peter was telling me something absolutely fascinating about Keith and a story that he told some years ago, and it's really absolutely mind-blowing, and it kind of put me in mind of the alternative 3 story as well, or scenario perhaps. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about...
Well, we started to draw back on this past information because of the fact that photographs may well hold a portal of being able to interrogate them through codes of colour. And it reminded me of my dear friend that I worked with many years, and I was doing research at the same time into UFOs and things like that. And I used to meet Keith in Wetherspoons about once a month. And he then told me this story of a friend of his who was a pathologist. And the pathologist and his wife lived in the same town as Keith did, and the pathologist let out a bit of information. He was obviously signed up to the Official Secrets Act. Basically what happened was that he would be given things on the slab brought in by a black van with people standing over while he had to do the autopsy and write a report. Then they would take the report and the remains away, and that's the end of it. And he was not to record anything. But unfortunately, so Keith said, that he actually kept mental notes of all of this and wrote it up when he got home, and then started to write a book. And it must have got out about this book that he was writing. And
was this in his retirement then? He was going to write this book?
Yes, that's right, yes. And basically one day he went out and was never seen again. As any family person would, they would raise great concerns about this, particularly as he was a pathologist of quite high standing, so we give him to understand. And
working for the government, obviously.
Yeah, at some level. And then one day his wife received a very large sum of money into the bank account. And
what, anonymously?
Anonymously, yes. And so she raised this with, I think, the police, and they didn't know anything about this, and then went to the solicitor, and the solicitor investigated this, because obviously a solicitor had been brought in, the fact he'd disappeared. Now this is all how it was given to me, you know, as a story. And so, how can I put it? The wife went out one day shopping, and when she came back she felt that there was something strange about the house. When she had a closer look, she found that every single photograph showing her husband, even wedding photographs, absolutely everything, had been taken. There was not a single photograph of his image whatsoever. And this got me thinking about an event that took place in my own family history, where Alexander was a double for Edward VII.
And who is Alexander to you?
Well, he was my great-great-grandfather, and because he was a German fluent speaker, also was a worshipful master of a lodge in London, Lord Salisbury Lodge, I believe. According to historical family information, he was a double, a stand-in for the king. So basically the Great Portland Hotel, the changeover would take place because Alexander's business was next to the Great Portland Hotel in Portland, Great Portland Street.
In London?
In London, yeah. And the king would then do whatever or the Prince of Wales at that time would do whatever he wanted to do, and Alexander would get in the coach and go around Hyde Park to pretend to be the king, and that was it, sort of thing. Well, when Alexander died, his wife was found pushed out of a window in Finchley, and there was no photographs whatsoever. They'd all gone. And it was only because I found a lost family member in Canada who had changed their name. One of Alexander's sons had gone to Canada and changed his name. That they gave me some of the photographs that they'd got. But I'm sure that they would have disappeared as well if they knew what. So there's something about photographs. However, going back to the pathologist, this sum of money was obviously kept, and then one day Keith was driving back and he noticed something strange about this property. The curtains were all drawn and everything, so he thought we'd go and see what was going on. So he went round the back of the property and had a look, and it was all closed up and everything. There was no sign of any life inside at all. So he thought, I can't do anything more about this. So he was coming out onto the road and he was approached by two gentlemen, and they had warrant cards. And they said, it's no good going about, just forget this. He said, they've gone, and that's the end of the matter. And you can tell your friend in Tunbridge Wells is treading on dangerous ground.
Meaning yourself?
Yeah, well, yes, obviously this is what he was saying. And basically, I took it that the ground indeed was dangerous. In fact, of the history that is below the ground of international interest, let's put it that way.
Yeah, just going back to the wife, wasn't there a moment when she said, I don't want the money instead of my husband, I want my husband?
Right. And then she disappeared then as well.
But didn't she also have an occasion to be approached by two men?
Well, yes, because they interviewed her and she said, I want to go where my husband is, because you said that my husband would come back only as remains, implying that he was alive. So basically, she disappeared as well.
Right.
And apparently they even told the children in New Zealand that they wouldn't see their father again.
Right. Hang on, Peter. Yeah. Okay, so we've got some guests, so we're just going to continue into the study that I didn't get a chance to tidy up. There's my wonder. Did you see these, Peter? Yes, you can see that. Look, did you see these that I just put into a frame? These are the caricatures that have been made. The before and after, the blonde. And these are Hilary Porter's amazing pictures. Which I think are so fascinating. That's actually an illustration of the guys who'd come out of her wardrobe, which was like a portal. And she called him Mr. Scan Man, this one. And he would literally scan her.
What's that? Because
this is a creature.
Rather like a Kenyan.
This is a creature.
Children said that they had these Kenyan spacemen at the back of the school, the aerial school.
Oh, really?
And basically the uniforms were black with enormous eyes. And they were about 4 feet tall, something like 5 feet tall. I did actually contact the aerial school to ask them if they would allow me to present my evidence that we had on the YouTube film to show where I picked up the stains that are still there in the scrubland, and I haven't had any reply back. Quite frankly, this is always the case.
So Mrs. Keith...
Yes, naval intelligence officers, basically, because they had warrant cards, you know. And so Keith just took the hint and left, and that was it, you see. And then one day Keith was sitting in a restaurant in his hometown, and a man was sitting reading a paper, staring at him across the room in the cafe. He got up and came over to Keith and said, do you recognise this person? And Keith knew it was the pathologist, but he said, no. And he said, oh, you've been got at as well, have you? And he went out, and then, of course, nothing more was said about this story. However, Keith went down to Brighton one day with his wife, and they spotted two people in the yachting marina area that looked very similar. The pathologist and his wife. And they were extremely tan and looked younger. And so he went over to see them, and he said, is it you? And they said, yes. I said, well, what's happened? He said, we've been... A story, he said, I was taken to a space station area and we landed up in Australia. My wife joined me, Woomera, I think it was possibly, and we were billeted there.
Woomera?
Well, it's the range in Australia.
It's where Hilary Porter's ex-husband had an amazing event.
Well, the thing is, they were billeted out there, and one day, because they had a double bed in this accommodation, and one day his wife woke up and there was nobody in the bed next to her, but there was the indentation in the mattress and the burn marks within the mattress of somebody who had been there. And then...
Did you say burn marks?
Well, it's like staining, like when Christ rose, an image of his form on the bed. That's how it was explained to me, you know.
Oh, wow.
So anyway, to cut a long story short, when they met these people, the pathologist said, we've been somewhere where you live for a very great time, you're paid in gold, and the gold we bring back has to be demassed because it's a different mass than the mass weight of gold down here.
Good
so you
Lord.
can't take it in and use it. It has to be treated before you can use it. Now, how you can make sense of that? But basically what he was saying was he was whisked away somewhere and his wife followed, and they've obviously gone back.
Just to be clear here,
Yeah.
which is where the alternative 3 idea comes in. We're talking, implying, this is off planet.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And not only that, but when I was doing my research in the little shop I was helping that John Amor walked into one day from somewhere, goodness knows where, one day I was sitting there were no customers at the time, and then these ghastly figures were staring at me through the window in the pavement, because my little chair behind the counter was right next to the window area, and they really looked distorted. So they looked in the window and everything, and I stared at them. So I thought, and then they moved away to walk down the road. So I then opened the door to the shop and looked at them, and they had strange gaits walking down the road. And there were people each side of the road walking with walkie-talkies, following down both sides of the road, as if they were following these people.
Oh, it sounds like they were some kind of alien individual.
Gone down for a day's shopping.
So look, we haven't said where
Yeah.
this location might be, this other body, but are we talking Mars, do you think?
Are we talking? No, I'm talking about somewhere of a great distance, possibly.
No, I mean for the pathologist and his wife?
Yeah, I would have said that they were taken away. And I don't believe this idea that it's taking thousands and thousands of years to go. The trouble is, I will say this, Keith was a member of a Masonic lodge in London.
Right, okay.
And they are quite good at trying to pass messages on to you. That's what they want you to hear can happen. And that's the story they throw out. But I do remember, though, in the 1970s, a case in the national press that reached the headlines of black Mariah vans taking strange objects into pathology departments to have them analysed and then were removed. Now, I can distinctly remember that right the way back in those years, because I've got quite a good memory here. For names, perhaps not.
Do you want to tell the story, do you think, about what Keith also told you about some files on a desk that he was shown? Him being taken to the Home Office.
Oh, yes, that's correct. Yes. Now, that's a different matter.
That's the story I'm talking about.
Yes. It's possibly a follow-on to this, that one day he was walking along the road and he was asked to get into a car. And, of course, he felt, because he knew these people with warrant cards, etc. And he was driven up to the Home Office in London. And this is how he described it. He said he was taken into a room and there was a gentleman behind the desk. There was flags behind the desk and there were armed guards in there. And on the desk, deliberately for him to see, were 3 lots of files. One on you, one on me, and one on Biolocation, that sort of thing.
Jeff Crockford.
Yeah.
I mean, I find that really hard to believe.
Yeah.
You know what year he might have told you that?
Well, 2006, my work went up to the MOD, some 230 files, research, which they said they would take but would not acknowledge. But I sent them by recorded insured post, so I got the receipts for that, you see.
But we didn't know each other at that point anyway.
2006, no?
No,
right. So basically this happened probably about 7, I would have said, about that time.
2007?
Well, before that, because I was meeting him in Wetherspoons regularly.
Because this is new. We haven't actually spoken about this
But
timing
what I'm trying to say
issue
is this
before.
guy was a rather enforcing type of character behind the desk. He said, we're very concerned about the work you're doing, the Biolocation, and what you're doing, and they weren't worried. So Keith said, well, what about that? He said, we're not worried about him.
You?
Yeah.
Really?
Well, partially because I was sending my work to them.
Right.
This is it. Most of my work went to Cambridge,
So when he would have told you about me, you didn't know me at that time. You wouldn't have known me. Would have met. I think I don't know whether it was after the Channel 4 documentary or a little before. So the Channel 4 documentary was June 2013, but I started the Amash Project 2011, and you might have come across it, but it was all on YouTube. So I don't know whether you
would have got it on YouTube. No,
so
I just
it
picked up a TV program and then did a search for it.
So that's 2013.
Yeah.
So when you heard the name, you didn't know me.
No.
So you didn't know what he was.
No, whether he was trying to pass a message on to me or what.
So when we met and you obviously found out my name, did you go, oh, that's that person that they mentioned at the Home Office?
Yeah, possibly, yeah. But
I mean, because that's weird.
Such a long time ago now. I don't write anything down. Definitely the Biolocation team were involved in this. The late Alan Hayday said to me, there's two gentlemen to be interested in the work you do. And they never refused to listen to anybody. So he gave me Nigel Hughes's contacts in St Albans. And so I contacted him on the phone. He was very nice about it. He said, look, we don't turn anybody away, unlike obviously people who try and,
academics
who try and smoke screen everything over. He said, look, there's a field behind my bungalow. And he gave me the postal code. And he said, tell me what you can find out about that grass field area. So I went on to that area and got it on Google Earth, and then I used all my codes, and I found a spring water run going across at an angle down to allotments. I found a whole row of graves, some with coffins, some without, some male, some female, in a long line. And then near the motorway, I found a load of tunnels and caves on Green 6, which is near Olive Green. And I laid this all out by photocopying the Google Earth map out and laying it all out in pen and ink on the map. And then I scanned it in and sent it over to Nigel. And then 10 minutes later, he sent me a message, how on earth did you do that? He said, because it's our training ground. You picked up the Roman burials, you picked up the Bronze Age tunnels near the motorway, and you picked up the spring water run down to the allotments. And then I started to explain to them. So in the end, I then got involved with them about using my codes of colours.
Yes, and then you introduced me to them, of course.
What people need to understand, these codes of colours are provided by ET through a 42 code. And I then ask them for the codes for whatever it is I'm looking for, whether it's a person, whether it's a life form, whether it's a mineral, a gas, or a creature. And they give me the colour codes for this, which I can convert into numbers, which some people might know as radionics. And I find that holding that colour barcode when it's painted up allows a complete reaction with a pendulum or L rods over a map that can actually locate the exact position of what that colour code equates to. So this is why we then used it for cases of missing people.
Can I just go back to what Jeff and Nigel and the group, the team, including Don Hocking, who's a retired physicist, were looking at was this, I don't know whether to call it an intergalactic war that was going on.
That's right, the Federation, yeah. Earth had been occupied, well, Keith actually said to this, the research that they were doing, because he said there was Masonic research going into this, and even the person I worked for knew about the research, and he wouldn't tell me, he'd allow me to find out for myself and correct me if I made mistakes. But the thing is that basically there was a war between two different factions. Basically, it was, let's say, the researchers at higher levels felt that Earth was once occupied by a full space race, either from development as it came out. I mean, we're talking about multiple millions of years ago. That was a high space race, high in technology, had expanded as we wished to, found other planets to live on, and occupied. And then there was a war. Something basically happened that allowed the fact that they had to evacuate Earth. I believe it might have been what we call an ice ball Earth, where something happened to the sun and made the Earth extremely cold, and therefore you could only either live below, but nothing grew on top. So they had to evacuate and went to where they had found. And then as things corrected themselves, they came back and then started things all off again. But then it developed into a war between two factions for control of Earth, and it was a nuclear war, and that's why we're picking up stains in the Ionian Sea of radioactive seawater in certain areas, and also rocks that have been, let's say, responding to cesium, strontium and plutonium, the long-lived particles. I've still got some of that seawater, and they still do respond, even though it's been in a plastic tube. And they found this in the Dead Sea as well, in certain areas there. And I know researchers in America have been finding areas of radioactive responses to nuclear weapons having been used. But it's a long, long, long time ago. Jeff thought it had been finished about 6,000 years ago. When they all evacuated, they left nothing except things in deep places like in the Lake District, deep down, which they thought we couldn't get hold of, and also maybe some scrap metals and things like that that the local tribes had got, which I've actually got bits of fossilized metal that they've made a knife out of, and it's fossilized. And I believe the Ancient Aliens TV film has shown a fossilized pickaxe, which was found in a mineral layer where the iron had crystallized into fossil. And they say that it takes about 400 million years to do that, and the actual wooden handle was turning to coal. Well, that gives you an idea of the age. And of course, fossilization of metals, the sort of metals that UFO craft are made of, would probably take the same time to fossilize. So how old is humanity then? I mean, we can't be getting the true story. I mean, they go on about these huge blocks of stone, weighing 50 tons, 100 tons. They're in Russia, they're in Malta, they're in Sicily, Sardinia, they're in Latin America. Look, they demassed them. So they floated them around and put them in. But how can you tell modern people that technology is there? This fits the technology. That guy in Florida was building his secret little...
Ed Leedskillen.
Edward Leedskillen. With his little box. He must have found some demassing things to move them
because he was a tiny little person. Coral Castle.
Look, there's an old saying. Anything that mankind can think up, it's possible to do. Just finding the way to do it.
Can I just take you back to these files? Because I find it hard to believe that somebody in some back office in the Home Office would have a file on me and you and Jeff. Yeah. I mean, what the heck?
Well, the Biolocation team,
And the Biolocation...
They're picking things up. But you do realise...
But I wasn't involved at that time.
No, well, they must know the research of the thing. Keith knew of you when we were meeting in Wetherspoons.
But not before 2013, did he? He couldn't have done, because the Channel 4 documentary...
was very strong in Wetherspoons, I'll tell you that.
the documentary was June 13th, 2013.
I mean, the Biolocation team and Keith and you were all involved in our golden wedding.
2015.
Yes, so
but certainly not in 2007 or 8 or 9.
The strange thing about my documents that went to the MOD, the end, and I will say this, the end of 2006, Christmas area of 2006, it came over on the BBC that the Bishop of London had been to a party at the Irish Embassy, Christmas party, and had called into the MOD to collect a package. And he collected this package and he was accosted getting into his car and the package was taken. I thought, well, that's a great coincidence. This was the information that was given on the radio. And then I knew what I'd sent there, and what I'd sent there would only be of interest to the UFO section of the MOD. Because the press officer said that it would be taken, not receipted, and...
So you think that somebody took a package of information or data...
That could have come from my...
That could have been yours?
Yes, but what is interesting is that, without mentioning any names, the woman concerned who was in charge of that section of the MOD left at the end of 2006.
Yeah.
Years and years later, well, it was last year, basically, I wonder whether they were my papers, and I contacted the bishop who now moved to the House of Lords, and I could get no answer whatsoever from them. No yes, no no, no response. So then I thought I'd contact my MP. No response whatsoever. No yes, no
It's
no.
a real hot topic, this UFO stuff, that nobody acknowledges.
But the thing is, when you start putting the whole picture together, you can build up quite an interesting scenario, you know.
Again, just going back to the files, because I find it really a very bizarre
but he
thing.
was driven back.
But did Jeff say anything about these? And then we'll get back to him, Keith being driven back.
No, he just said that they wanted to know, and he just said that they were concerned about the work there. I suppose they wanted the message to come back to Biolocation team that they were concerned about the work that they were doing, the research they were doing.
And that I was filming some of it and
yes,
putting
possibly,
it out there.
Yeah. That could be it, and they knew what I was doing because I sent.
Because you sent them the information.
I was finding all this stuff out, and I did not know where to send it. I felt this needed to be gotten out to the right people, not just for putting on YouTube or anything like that. So I was sending it to Cambridge, and a certain gentleman there said, just keep sending it, I enjoy reading it. And I was sending it to Room 32 NASA, which was the director of NASA, and it was never rejected at all.
And you sent it to the Astronomer Royal as well, haven't you?
And other university sections. But university sections are far more difficult to deal with because, I don't know, whether it's the deans or whatever it is, they also belong to the club. But the thing is that computers are all UFO related. If you look at the top row, you'll look at the small little section F9, 10, 11 and 12. That adds up to 42 and it's in its own little section. Next row below, you've got 0 to 9. Well, you add that all up, it's 45. M42 for the Orion Galaxy and M45 for the Pleiades system. At the end of the Pleiades system is a little divining rod.
But it's not on every single keyboard because I checked.
It's one thing that leads to another, and then you remember this and say, oh, it's strange. Now, I thought photographs. I've been trying to do my family tree, and there's deliberate misinformation about John Ellis, the artist, who was one of my ancestors. Because
what era are we speaking?
He was born 1701 and died 1757, and he was given accommodation in the Tower of London for about 20 years. It was stated that Walpole gave him that because he was a purchaser of tapestries and artwork for the Crown and for Walpole, apart from also being a major portrait artist, doing all sorts of famous people, and also being one of the original founders of the Royal Academy in Burlington. Not the new Royal Academy as we know, that was not complete until after his death, but he worked with Hogarth as well. The thing is, John Ellis's first wife, Lydia Scott, died, and it was said that her brother or relation was Francis Scott, and that John Ellis, doing this work, he actually painted a portrait of Frederick Louis, Prince of Wales, and Frederick Louis had a bit of a reputation for ladies and mistresses. And it's well known. He died of being hit with a cricket ball, by the way, and died of a late...
Oh, not syphilis then?
No, well... but the thing is that he got one Mary Dell, the mistress, into a bit of a bother. So John Ellis was asked if he would marry her, which he agreed to do. And they were married in Sunbury-upon-Thames in 1742. So his first wife had died, Lydia. His second wife was Mary, became Mary Ellis, Needell. They've put it on Sussex artists as Sarah. Well, the thing is, that son that was born to Mary Dell and John Ellis, he 20 years later married a Sarah. Got the two Johns mixed up. But that Sarah was the daughter of the Reverend John Walker and Charlotte Walker, and he was royal chaplain for George II. So you can see the scenario, though, then, between Frederick Louis, George II's son, and now, let's put it this way, nobody in the MP world or the Prime Ministership can award, as far as I understand, a person's ability to reside in a royal palace, being the Tower of London. Only a member of the royal family can possibly allow for somebody to have a residence in the Tower of London. And it had to be Frederick Louis with Walpole and John Ellis, because they were all basically forerunners in science, art, and whatever was bringing people up gradually at that time. So they all knew each other. And funnily enough, they all died about the same time together. So I was left trying to sort out who the children were of John Ellis's son via Frederick Louis. And I have all these photographs at home. And this takes me back to the Keith situation and the Alexander situation, where all the photographs were taken. And I found that by holding the 42 code and going over, and even a photograph taken in the 1900s or from very first photography, allows contact. And I was able to get the children of Sarah and John, of which one was James, and actually found that James founded Armley Mills, which is now the Industrial Museum in Leeds, and they were given Dunkirk House under a lease from the 5th Earl of Derby. So the whole lot, they all knew each other. We're making military uniforms, the red cloth for the military uniforms. So we have to ask who John Ellis, the artist, was. Why should anybody want to change the names around? Because I found this out donkeys years ago, so anybody else doing research should be able to get the correct people. Anyway, we had this tablecloth at home with this royal crest on the top, and it was supposed to be the Duke of Monmouth's, and the logo underneath, C for Charles and M for Monmouth over it. So I started to do research in this, and I found indeed the griffin on the top of the cap was Monmouth's, from the Dukes of Buccleuch. The logo. So the Duke of Monmouth had a relationship with Henrietta Wentworth, and a child was born and was adopted to an army gentleman, and then that son went into the church and the name was changed to Smythe as an alias. Somehow that's where the Scott comes in, John Scott. So John Ellis was basically John Scott, with Lydia Scott being a relation, and he changed his name to Ellis. So an alias to Ellis. So I managed to sort of ferret that out. I'm trying to find out the details of this Scott and relationship. So I want to go into our local library to get the Burke's Peerage out. And I found that they weren't in the reference library. They always were in the reference library, but they weren't in the reference library. And it wasn't where it was supposed to be. So he said, I'll ask questions about what's happened to this volume. That's Burke's Peerage, any Burke's Peerage. And also I noticed that the Oxford Biographicals had disappeared, which actually shows John Ellis, Keeper of the Lions, because that's what happened to John Ellis. When he took this lady on, he was awarded as Keeper of the Lions in the Tower and had use of this flat. So far, I've had no answer at all to my request about what has happened to Burke's Peerage. I find that there is no security in the library whatsoever that used to be in the old library with a book, because they had a little sensor inside, sent the alarm off if you did. Essential research work is not able to be done.
For the public in general are being restricted from what's available to research on. We're talking about books, not the having to do it online. And with that, I think we should get back to our guests. Thank you very much for that enlightening thing. And I still am absolutely hornswoggled about some bod in the back of the Home Office.
The Home Office was called Department 9, 5 and M6, plus 11 for the Chancellor, plus 10 for the Prime
Downing
Minister,
Street.
and 9
was the
makes
Home Office.
41, but 1 for the Crown is 42.
Oh, Peter, it's all so hornswoggling.
Yeah,
I'm still kind of reeling that some bod's got a file on me in the back of the Home Office.
That's what was said.
And that you have, and so did Jeff. Bless him. Anyway, on that note, let's go and have another Christmas tipple.
Yeah, okay. You never know what volume 2 might say.
Wonderful. Okie dokie.